All right, how's everyone doing? Hey guys, I think we're gonna get started. Is everyone's good? Okay, cool. So we moved the coat rack to the back room, just a heads up, okay? There's some refreshments if you like. We should have a bit of water, some coffee, and some muffins. Thanks so much everyone for coming out tonight. I'm very, very excited to announce this book launch event with our author, Gabriel Rockhill. We've got a really special lineup. Yeah, let's give him a hand. And we've got a really special lineup of speakers joining him tonight. And I just hope each of us comes away with a new, meaningful perspective and hopefully a better understanding of socialist thought and organizing afterwards. I'll start off with a brief intro and then I'll pass the mic to Gabriel. Gabriel's going to give an intro and overview of some of the points covered in his book. And then we'll start the panel discussion. After which we'll move on to the Q&A. And we would really like you guys to participate for that. At the end, we'll have some time for mingling. And Gabe will do a book signing for anyone who's interested. And we'll be selling the book all evening, just at the table over there. It's $40 and we accept cash and e-transfer. So first I'd like to start off by thanking all of our organizers here today. This event was, let's give a round of applause. Thank you guys. This event was a full team effort and a collaboration between many different partners who are all doing meaningful and exciting work. And it's hopefully going to be the first of many. The two principal organizations that brought this event here are the Popular Front of Canada and Chow Collective. The Popular Front of Canada is a scientific socialist mass organization mostly based in the Greater Toronto Area and Hamilton at this time. This is a new organization that formed last year in response to the genocide in Gaza and the need for urgent international solidarity with Palestine. At the same time, the Popular Front of Canada aims to unify the working class and progressive movements here at home with the goal of transforming this society for the better. The Popular Front aims to build a modernized organization in all areas in order to push for a new direction where the left can be as relevant, reliable, and successful as possible in this modern era. Chow Collective is a diaspora Chinese media collective with the aim of equipping the anti-war movements in Canada and the US with tools and analysis to better combat the stoking of a new Cold War. They aim to confront the internalization of propaganda amongst the Western left by critically and realistically examining China's role in this world struggle against imperialism and capitalism. Chow Collective remains committed to the principles of socialist internationalism in the spirit of solidarity and mutual exchange with the liberation movements of all global South and colonized peoples. We also want to thank Critical Theory Workshop, which Gabriel is a part of. Of course, the Critical Theory Workshop is an educational nonprofit that brings affordable and free education with real use value to a broad international public. They've grown over the years to include an online summer school, public symposiums and book launches, online lectures and interviews, and an extensive video archive as a free public educational resource. Critical Theory Workshop it's had the good fortune of working with a long list of prestigious speakers, including figures like Domenico Lacerdo, Radhika Desai, Genevieve Fries, and Amy Allen, among others. We'd of course like to thank the publisher of Gabriel's book, Monthly Review. For those who don't know, Monthly Review is an independent socialist magazine and press. They first began publication in New York City in May 1949, and the first issue featured the lead article, Why Socialism, by Albert Einstein. From the beginning, Monthly Review has spoken for a critical but spirited socialism, independent of any political organization. And lastly, we have our media partners today, principally East is a Podcast, whose host, Sina Romani, will be chairing our discussion component. We'd also like to thank our other media partners, the Anti-Empire Project, as well as the Journal of International Solidarity. And you can find the links and pages for every one of these organizations on the Instagram post for this event, which is on the Popular Front of Canada Instagram page, as well as all the other organizers. And finally, just before we bring Gabe onto the stage, I'd just like to say a quick word of tribute to someone very special to us. The legendary comrade, Dr. Michael Parenti, passed away a few days ago. And there's so much we could say about Michael Parenti. It'd probably take us a whole event just to even scratch the surface, but many of us, of course, were directly inspired by this great comrade. And he played a really crucial role in the development of basically an entire generation of progressives, socialists, and revolutionaries. If you're new to Michael Parenti, I recommend starting with his book, Black Shirts and Reds, and you can find all of his lectures online. In particular, there's one it's known as the Yellow Parenti lectures that would be pretty eye-opening for for those of you not familiar yet. I'd like to thank the Wild Seed Center, of course, for hosting this event, especially Anthony, who's been really great to work with. Wild Seed Center is a multi-purpose community space that serves to nurture radical Black experimentation and creation. It's a space dedicated to Black liberation. Let's not forget that we're currently in Black History Month, and which is directly relevant to the topic of Marxism, because we can't discuss Marxism without paying tribute to the many Black African thinkers, leaders, and activists, from legends like Paul Robeson, W.E.B. Du Bois, Claudia Jones, Assata Shakur, and many, many others. In particular, one of my favorite Marxists would be the Pan-African leader and theoretician Amilcar Cabral. Cabral successfully led the revolution against Portuguese colonial rule in Guinea-Bissau. And I'll just leave you with one quote by him, which goes as follows. The quote goes this: "Always bear in mind that the people are not fighting for ideas, for the things in anyone's head. They're fighting to win material benefits, to live better and in peace, to see their lives go forward, to guarantee the future of their children." Ultimately, that's our goal, and I hope that's the goal of every single one of you in this audience tonight. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce, in my opinion, one of the leading Marxist thinkers today, someone whose ideas we desperately need in this modern era. Gabriel Rockhill is the founding director of the Critical Theory Workshop, professor of philosophy and global interdisciplinary studies at Villanova University, and research associate at the Laboratory for Political Anthropology in Paris, France. He's the author or editor of 12 books, including Requiem pour la French Theory with Aymeric Monville, forthcoming in English via Monthly Review Press. And of course, his most recent book, which you're here to discuss today, is Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism by Monthly Review Press 2025. And yeah, without further ado, let's all make some noise for Gabriel. I'll pass the mic.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And a big thanks to the organizers. This has been a group effort. There have been a lot of people who have been involved, and it's so important to be able to collaborate and bring people together in community, but then also hopefully facilitate what will be a lively and productive conversation. I wanted to start out with what is, I think, currently my favorite joke, which is the following. Everyone, of course, knows that socialism looks good on paper, but in the end, you just get invaded by the United States. And what I'd like to do is frame the current project in terms of the US model of empire building. And some of this comes out of the second volume of this trilogy. Who Paid the Pipers of Western Marxism is the first, and then the second is French Theory Made in USA, which explores the imperial cultural dynamics behind the promotion of postmodern French theory as a kind of cutting-edge weapon of ideological war against dialectical and historical materialism. So the United States emerged victorious from the Second World War as the unrivaled leader of the capitalist camp, yet it suffered a major setback in the battle of ideas. In order to be on the winning side of the war, it had to ally with its erstwhile and future enemy, the Soviet Union. This compelled the US government and its culture industries to radically alter their depiction of the Reds to the point of presenting them as being on the right side of history. I'd encourage everyone, if they haven't seen it, to watch Michael Curtis's 1943 film Mission to Moscow, which basically defends a pro-Stalinist position on the part of Hollywood. And there are many other films that were produced between 1941 and 1945 that depict the Soviet Union in more or less the opposite way that it's been depicted both prior to that time and after that time. So at the close of the Second World War, the United States was facing a situation where communism benefited from an unprecedented level of popular support. Its own culture industries had contributed to this, including with other pro-Soviet films, as I just mentioned. And moreover, on the battlefield, the Red Army had not only routed the Nazis and liberated Auschwitz, along with other gas chambers, but it freed Eastern Europe from the scourge of fascism and authoritarianism. What is more, the anti-fascist war continued across the global South as the anti-colonial war, with communists taking decisive leadership positions, waging in many cases successful wars of national liberation. Communism in the minds of many around the world was synonymous with anti-fascist and anti-colonial liberation. It was not only popular in the political arena, but it was also embraced by a significant number of intellectuals, writers, and artists. These included prominent figures like Pablo Picasso, Pablo Neruda, Langston Hughes, Paul Robeson, and fellow travelers like Jean-Paul Sartre or Simone de Beauvoir, among many others. It is difficult to imagine today in an era of rising fascism, but communism was widely celebrated in the wake of the Second World War as a harbinger of human freedom. This produced a legitimacy crisis for the leaders of the capitalist world. What they put forth was a two-pronged solution. McCarthyism represented one tactic for combating communism. The stick of repression was wielded to crack down on those with leftist sympathies. Many of the figures that I just mentioned were slandered, blacklisted, called before HUAC, forced into political exile, or worse. Questions still abound regarding the deaths of Neruda and Robeson. The United States did not only use the stick of repression to combat its enemy, which it wielded aggressively around the world, it also employed the carrot to lure those interested in radical politics in a direction that was not a threat to the capitalist interests. Its intelligence agencies played a leading role in this endeavor, and their strategy was more sophisticated than most people are aware. Instead of simply funding and supporting right-wing organizations and individuals, they engaged in a clandestine campaign to support the left on the condition that it was non-communist. As one of the major CIA officers overseeing these operations explained, his agency actually went behind the back of US Congress to finance self-proclaimed socialists. Quote, in much of Europe in the 1950s, this is Thomas Braden, socialists, people who called themselves left, were the only people who gave a damn about fighting the communists. In understanding, oh, sorry, I just dropped a ring because I was playing with it. If you find a ring, bring it back over here. Its intelligence agencies played a leading role in this. I'm sorry, the combat against communism then was aimed at supporting the non-communist left, the social democratic left, and shoring it up as an explicit weapon of war against the anti-colonial project. In undertaking such operations, the intelligence agencies had several goals. One was to divide the left by severing the communists from the socialists and other leftists, thereby rendering the left in general easier to conquer. Another was to discredit what they referred to as the non-compatible left, meaning the communist left that was not compatible with capitalist and imperialist objectives. Yet another was to shore up and promote a compatible left that was not inimical to their interests. The end result, or so they hoped, would be to consolidate a domesticated anti-communist left as the only legitimate form of leftism. One of the strategies that proved to be particularly useful, as internal documents reveal, was a soft sell approach. Rather than striving to turn leftists into right-wing ideologues, the government agencies involved sought to create opportunities for them to remain, at least ostensibly, on the left. A May 16, 1952 memo entitled Ideological Warfare spelled this out in very clear terms. This document was drafted by the Psychological Strategy Board, which was established in 1951 to oversee the psychological warfare operations of the CIA, the State Department, military services, and other governmental agencies. The memo insisted on the importance of producing and promoting, quote, attacks against communist ideology developed in Marxist terms, end quote. It also advocated for, quote, a defense of Western society in Marxist terms, end quote. The objective was thus to allow those influenced by Marxism to remain Marxists, at least in principle, by cultivating a version of Marxism that was anti-communist and pro-Western. These covert operations to redefine the left in the post-war era have largely come to light thanks to the tireless work of investigative journalists and researchers who broke this story starting in the mid-60s. Due to the revelations of Ramparts magazine and other outlets, the US government opened its own series of investigations. The public learned in 1975, to take but one of the more relevant examples from the Church Committee report, that the CIA was working with, quote, many thousands of United States academics at hundreds of academic institutions, end quote. There's been no reform or change since that would alter that overall situation. Researchers have since elucidated the astounding international breadth of these operations. The Congress for Cultural Freedom was a CIA front organization at the center of these activities. According to historian Hugh Wilford, it was probably the largest patron of art and culture in the history of the world. With offices in 35 countries, it published dozens of prestige magazines. It owned news and feature services. Feature services are the way in which news is produced and then it's sent out to the press outlets. So it's like upstream from the press outlets themselves. It funded various cultural awards, organized high-profile international conferences, art exhibits, concerts, and much more. Francis Stonner Saunders, whose Who Paid the Piper became an instant classic, claimed that almost every intellectual and artist in Western Europe was somehow affected by the networks of the CCF, the Congress for Cultural Freedom. My most recent book draws on this important scholarship, extends it through additional archival research and Freedom of Information Act requests, and develops a dialectical and historical materialist methodology that focuses on the political economy of the production, distribution, and consumption of knowledge, meaning it provides a materialist analysis of knowledge production. One way to understand it is that it subjects Marxist and leftist scholarship to a Marxist analysis. It is a reflexive engagement that unfortunately has been inimical to the interests of Western Marxists. It asks the basic question of the material conditions driving certain forms of knowledge production while prohibiting, sidelining, denigrating, or attempting to destroy other forms of knowledge, thereby positions intellectuals as important power brokers within class struggle. The book provides a diagnosis of why the left in the imperial core and beyond has moved so far to the right. It is now not only generally anti-communist, but it tends to be, at a minimum, accommodationist toward capitalism and even imperialism. The book explains, in other words, why and how the left has been largely transformed into a hollow and fake left, which has lost its bearings. This critique is, however, framed within an overall positive project of rejuvenating the long and rich tradition of anti-imperialist Marxism, which is simply Marxism tout court. In other words, far from being a negative critique, the entire book is framed in terms of a positive contribution to reconnecting the red thread to the revolutionary tradition of dialectical and historical materialism. What are the forces that have remade the left, and what role has the intelligentsia played, including the self-proclaimed leftist or even Marxist intelligentsia? My book proposes a materialist analysis of the dialectical play of forces between individual subjects and the superstructures of the world's leading imperialist states to answer this question. It accounts for the subjective contributions of major left intellectuals, charting their evolution over time when necessary, and highlighting exceptions if there are any. Unlike the bourgeois humanities, however, it rejects intellectual commodity fetishism, meaning the bracketing of the social relations of production in the name of simply maintaining a kind of almost religious dedication to the sacred cows of the imperial theory industry. So it jettisons this intellectual commodity fetishism in favor of an unswerving materialist analysis of the systems of knowledge production and distribution. Rather than beginning with the isolated individual as the true source of ideas or the fount of political actions, it raises the question of the material forces that have produced the types of individuals who are prone to think and act in particular ways, and it continues to reproduce them in a systematic manner. The Marxist category of the superstructure is particularly useful for understanding this system, as long as one approaches it as a metaphor that is as insightful as it is limited. The superstructure is dialectically enmeshed within the socioeconomic infrastructure, and it is thus only really heuristically distinct. Marx identified two different components of the superstructure: the political legal apparatus, centered in the bourgeois state on the one hand, and the cultural apparatus, meaning the entire material system for the production and dissemination of culture in the broadest sense of the term: theory, religion, art, entertainment, and many other forms. Language would be a good example. The dominant culture and ruling ideas of a given society are the culture and ideas of its ruling class, because it owns and controls the cultural apparatus, meaning the entire system of ideological production and dissemination. The professional intelligentsia in the imperial core is thus a product of the superstructure of empire. Its members occupy a privileged position within global class hierarchies, and the most acclaimed of them are wealthy and powerful power brokers. They are part of what I refer to in the book as the intellectual labor aristocracy. Since they benefit both materially and symbolically from the imperial world order, they do not have a vested interest in overcoming it. Moreover, the cultural apparatus within which they operate punishes veritable anti-communist work while promoting positions that, directly or indirectly, advance the interests of imperialism. The system of demotions and preferments often functions well enough on its own. However, when it does not, the political legal apparatus of the state intercedes to manage and control the cultural apparatus. So it's integral to see both elements. It's not that the CIA is controlling people with puppet strings or any of these kind of more ludicrous ideas. It's that the superstructure materially conditions certain forms of intellectual production, and that when that doesn't happen as it should within the organic system of cultural production, state forces will intercede in order to direct it and make sure that it does what it is tasked with doing. In case any of this sounds slightly abstract, I'd like to give you a concrete example that I spell out in the book, which also has the advantage of shedding light on the military-industrial academic complex that I analyze as well. This example explains in part why so many leftists in the imperial core and beyond reject actually existing socialism and presume that the Soviet Union, the same could be said of China today, was a horrific failure, often adamantly insisting that they know this for certain, in spite of a very questionable knowledge base. Alain Badiou, a self-proclaimed communist intellectual, writes, for instance, quote, "The failure of all socialist and communist experiences in the last century had as its consequence that we do not have today a great and clear idea of another world," end quote. Similar statements have been made by nearly all of the leftist intellectuals prominent in the imperial core, like Epstein's friend, Noam Chomsky, who we were talking about a little bit earlier today. Western Sovietology, which established the dominant intellectual consensus on the Soviet Union, was not the result of objective research undertaken by autonomous intellectuals working toward a scientific depiction of reality. It was the product of the imperial superstructure, and more specifically, the first two area studies programs set up in the United States were U.S. national security state cutouts. What I mean by that is that the intelligence services worked with the administration of the universities of Harvard and Columbia in order to relocate their national intelligence researchers at Columbia and Harvard to undertake the same type of research that they were doing for organizations like the OSS, State Department, CIA, etc., but to provide it, very importantly, with academic cover. This is essential to see because many, or at least some on the left, are able to see through the forms of propaganda produced in the journalistic world, but they have a lot more trouble seeing it in the academic world. But the same basic mechanisms are at play. What the state does is it academically launders state propaganda and gives it a stamp of approval by finding professors that it works with at Harvard, Princeton, Yale, or many, many other places. And so if you're in a leftist debate with someone who starts telling you that they know about the Soviet Union because they've read, I don't know, Robert Conquest or other people like this, or who? Yeah, or right-wing figures like that, or Anne Applebaum, or other figures of their ilk. These are just imperial ideologues who are doing, academically laundered state propaganda. This has nothing to do with a materialist analysis of the Soviet Union, which does not mean that then one has to say that, well, anything that happened in the Soviet Union was absolutely perfect and excellent, and we have to embrace it. No, you engage in an actual materialist analysis that is objective rather than having your analysis mediated by state and propagandistic forces. Now, I don't know exactly how much time I have left, but 9 minutes. Okay, well, this is going to go on for a while then. What I wanted to turn to is the contemporary stakes of why it is that I wrote this book, and hopefully this will then open up to the larger conversation that we'll have. The goal of the book is not only to provide people with an understanding of the imperial superstructure, and then more specifically, the way in which Western or imperial Marxism needs to be understood as a product of that imperial superstructure. The larger goal of the book is to rejuvenate the anti-imperialist Marxist tradition in the contemporary conjuncture in which class struggle globally is at fever pitch, in the sense that imperialism has driven us into what Georges Gastaut calls, with others, the age of exterminism. Now we are in a position where it is very clear that if capitalism and imperialism aren't abolished, it's the end of humanity, if not of all life forms on planet Earth. The stakes could not be higher. So many people have been brought into politics or radicalized through the live stream genocide in the Middle East. However, the struggle for a free Palestine, based on my experience organizing around Palestine on university campuses, is often disconnected from the larger fight against imperialism. For the purposes of political education and the cultivation of strategic thought and practice, I therefore like to draw on Mao's reworking of the Hegelian dialectic to highlight different levels of political consciousness, which is ultimately necessary for the type of left rejuvenation argued for in the book. And don't be intimidated by the fancy references to dialectic and Hegel and Mao for that matter. It's relatively straightforward what I'm going to lay out. The lowest form of political consciousness operates at the level of sense perception. What you see is what you get. It often consists in simply looking at something, identifying it as politically unacceptable, like wanton violence, and rejecting it. Now, this type of moral reaction can be a powerful subjective mechanism for bringing people into the struggle. And it has been widespread within the campus movements I've participated in. While at the same time, it can be a starting point, but one of the risks if one simply remains at the level of sense perception and subjective moral indignation in the face of a genocide is that it can relatively easily be co-opted if it does not advance to a higher level of political consciousness, which we can call, following Mao, logical understanding. As a matter of fact, the intelligence services of the imperialist powers have developed an entire industry of color revolutions that is often based, at least in part, on instrumentalizing the moral indignation of subjects who reject certain forms of violence. By relying on highly developed forms of psychological warfare, this moral indignation can be channeled into tacit and explicit support for humanitarian interventions and regime change operations, as we see very clearly in the case of Iran, and we've also seen in the case of Libya, Syria, Venezuela is slightly different, but these types of regime change operations are constant. What logical understanding does is it develops a rigorous materialist analysis of the social totality that allows us to situate particular acts of violence or other phenomena within the overall play of forces. If one develops critical media literacy skills and an understanding of the depth, breadth, and complexity of imperialist psychological warfare, then it is possible to subsume, sorry again for the philosophic reference, but in the sense of Aufheben, in the Hegelian sense of overcoming, but also incorporating. So to overcome and incorporate one's subjective moral reaction, which often is rooted in a kind of humanist orientation, within an objective analysis of the particular phenomenon in question and the rival forms of explanation. This can help insulate us against the instrumentalization of subjective moralism in favor of what are objective imperialist projects. The effort to cultivate objective understanding can and ultimately should be subsumed within the third and highest level of political consciousness, right? So we move from sense perception and the kind of subjectivist moralism to a logical understanding of the actual material play of forces to what Mao refers to as practical reason or praxis. Whereas logical understanding allows us to grasp the objective dynamic of a given situation, practical reason provides us with the tools necessary for changing it. This requires strategic thinking, meaning the ability to engage in an assessment of the complex web of forces and the identification of intermediate tactics that can make those forces work toward particular objectives. This level of thinking is unfortunately rather rare because it requires overcoming the subjectivism that consists in simply wanting or demanding that one's ideals be achieved without knowing how to realize them objectively. It requires the practical knowledge of how to, from a subjective nodal point within a complex subjective reality, orchestrate the multiple forces at work to move history. Crucially, as Lenin, one of the greatest strategists of all time, regularly insisted, this sometimes entails compromises, retreats, tactical alliances, and so forth. Lenin also pointed out that the kind of moral subjectivism is rife within the middle layer or the petty bourgeoisie that often wants to, on the one hand, work in such a way that they satisfy the needs of their corporate overlords or the capitalist ruling class, but nonetheless wants to be identified with, and at a certain material level is identified with, the general working classes. So it's often kind of bounced back and forth between these two extremes, and hence it is a relatively unstable class in its ideological commitments. Dialectical and historical materialism is the most powerful tool that human beings have developed for cultivating a coherent understanding of the socio-natural totality, as well as the strategic thought and practice necessary for not only interpreting the world, but ultimately changing it. One of the overall objectives of my book is to contribute to the rejuvenation of this rich tradition, clarifying how some of it has been ideologically weakened by imperial forces. As I say in the conclusion, those of us who have been confused in various ways by Western or imperial Marxism or other products of the imperial theory industry have nothing but our intellectual chains to lose, and we have a world to win. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
All right, that was awesome. I look forward to hearing more and engaging with these ideas. Thanks so much, Gabriel. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists now, and we're going to move on to that discussion, and then it's going to be immediately followed by the Q&A. And we really hope to generate a lot of thought-provoking discussion. So please participate, ask your questions, and we'll get a good discussion going. I'm honored to be able to introduce these guests that we have today. We have a really great lineup for you guys. Starting from, I guess, right to left. We have first Ziad Al-Nabulsi. Ziad is an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at York University. He specializes in the history of African philosophy. His latest book is Pauline Hontoji and the Science Question in Africa. Our second speaker is Justin Potter. Justin is the author with Joe Emersberger of Extraordinary Threat, the U.S. Empire, the Media, and 20 Years of Coup Attempts in Venezuela, which was also published by Monthly Review. He's also the author of America's Wars on Democracy in Rwanda and the DR Congo, another book called Siege Breakers, and another book called Haiti's New Dictatorship, which was published by Pluto Press in 2012. He's the host of the Anti-Empire Project, which is a podcast, Substack, and YouTube channel. And our third speaker is Sardana Nikolaeva. Born and raised in the Sakha Republic, Russia, Sardana is a political anthropologist primarily researching and writing about global indigenous politics. She is particularly interested in communist indigenous women activism in the Soviet Union, indigenous experiences in 1990s Russia, and the militarization of the Arctic. And lastly, our chair for this portion of the discussion is Sina Rahmani. Sina has also an extensive academic background. He's currently the host of East is a Podcast, and he's going to chair the rest of the discussion. So let's give a big hand for all of our panelists, and we'll chat soon.
Hi, everyone. I don't really know what I'm doing here, but I'm excited. So who's first? Ziad. Okay. I feel like Vanna White.
Yeah. Okay. Well, first I want to begin by thanking the organizers. A lot of work went into making this happen. A lot of work in the background. I also want to thank the attendees for coming here, and hopefully we can have a great discussion. Of course, I want to thank Gabriel for writing the book and for being here as well. So I'm going to begin by making some comments about the book, what I think the book is doing, what I think the book is not doing. And of course, the nice thing and the dangerous thing with having the author next to you is that you could be wrong about interpreting the book, but we can have this debate. I also don't believe that authors always have proprietary rights exactly when it comes to interpreting their work, but we'll get to that. But I want to begin, so given the misunderstanding that you see circulating online in some circles, so I want to begin by talking about what I think the book is not doing, because I think people have misunderstood what the book is doing. Well, not really misunderstood, because sometimes there has been no attempt to read the book. But anyway, so Rockhill is not saying that every intellectual who, and here I'm quoting from the book, from page 159, who received the Ford grant collaborated with a compromised intellectual or published in a journal secretly backed by the CIA is a spirited contributor to a global anti-communist conspiracy, right? That's not the claim. And I take it that to determine whether someone was a spirited contributor, to use the term, one would have to, figure out whether that person was intentionally thinking of their work as part of this anti-communist crusade as a spirited contributor. You'd also have to figure out whether the content of the work that was published in CIA-backed journals, such as, for example, Encounter, which was published in England, or Transition, which is a very famous journal, which was published in Uganda, and Hiwar, published in Lebanon, whether the work of these individuals had any direct relation to an anti-communist campaign. And I say this because presumably a lot of the work published in these journals maybe included, fairly innocuous works of cultural criticism or cultural history. That don't really have work that doesn't really have a direct bearing on communism and anti-communism in any obvious way, right? And of course, even when we're speaking of the publication of work that had an explicitly anti-communist bent to it in CIA-funded journals, is there a sound issue? Okay, the sound. Okay, we're good. And of course, even when you were looking at work that had an explicit anti-communist bent to it in CIA-funded journals or through direct support from foundations that had close ties to American intelligence agencies and that represented the standpoint of the ruling elites in the United States, such as the Rockefeller Foundation, and such as the Rockefeller grant that Herbert Marcuse received in 1959 to work on one-dimensional man. So Gabriel discusses this in pages 382, 383, for those who want to follow in the book. Now, establishing that the work was funded in this manner does not by itself show that the author adopted the views that they adopted because they received funding, right? That's, I think, one of the interesting questions that arises, right? So it's entirely possible that the author held these views independently prior to securing funding, and that the author attracted funding precisely because this author's views were judged to be useful by the ruling class, right? So I think it's not simply a model of, you show up with a bag of money and this intellectual changes their mind. I don't think Gabriel is giving us that kind of analysis. I think this would be a misinterpretation. And I think that the key question that I'm interested in is what is the archival work on the connections between the Frankfurt School and the US state apparatus, which actually Gabriel shows masterfully. It's really an industrial American academic military complex, right? He goes into quite a bit of detail. So what is the archival work between on the connections between the Frankfurt School and this state apparatus? What is this work supposed to explain? What is the phenomenon that this work is supposed to explain? So is it supposed to explain the anti-communist views which were held by the individuals, the key individuals in the Frankfurt School? So Adorno, Marcuse, and others? Or is it supposed to explain why this form of critical theory came to be identified with Marxism in Western academia and why it became hegemonic as the interpretation of Marxism? Such that today, if you tell people that you're interested in Marx, people will often use Marxism and critical theory as synonyms, especially in my discipline, in philosophy. People will do this all the time. And my interpretation of the book is that Gabriel's detailed archival work is primarily meant to explain why critical theory came to be deemed the hegemonic interpretation of Marxism. It's not about explaining why these individuals, such as Marcuse and Adorno, why they adopted anti-communist views in the first instance. Now, the reason I say this is because one could say, look, there's really no need to invoke structures of material and symbolic incentives and disincentives to explain the initial anti-communism of somebody like Adorno and Marcuse. It's sufficient to note that they had a certain conception of socialism, a utopian conception of socialism, as Gabriel indicates in the book, which they saw was not being actualized in the USSR, and then they rejected actually existing communism on that ground, right? So it could be this just a process of reasoning happening at the individual level. And I take it that what needs to be explained is why did their brand of critical theory become dominant as an interpretation of Marxism? And Gabriel's answer, if I've understood it correctly, is that it became hegemonic or dominant because it suited the Cold War exigencies of the ruling class in the United States by driving a wedge between Marxism and actually existing socialism or communism. And I think here it's important to remember that the sociology of knowledge, or the term that Gabriel uses in the book, actually the political economy of knowledge, which is a bit different, it doesn't really aim to explain why certain ideas arise in the minds of particular individuals at a particular point in time, that, I had this interpretation of Hegel or whatever. But rather it primarily aims at explaining why certain ideas become hegemonic on a more general social level. So these are some of the comments and questions, I suppose, some of that I had about the methodology of the book and about what the book is doing or not doing. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the comments and the close reading of the book, as well as the clarification of what the publication is not doing. I mentioned this earlier today, but one of my favorite review of the book that has come out is a review where the author says, like most commentators, I have not read the book, and then provides the review. And so it's a kind of negation of the review itself. I almost wanted to respond to it, but I'd already read it, so I couldn't actually give a response to it. The question that you raise, I think, is an important methodological issue about the relationship between, as I'll put it in slightly different vocabulary, subjects, like intellectual subjects, and systems, meaning the material systems within which they operate. And you're absolutely right, and I'm glad that you insisted on this point, that there's not a kind of monocausal, mechanical description of individuals being almost like, what's that movie, Inception? Like they have an idea planted in their mind because of some nefarious conspiracy that is brewing around them. And so the system would just produce directly, in a reductivist sense, ideas within the subject. That's not the argument. Part of the argument is, as you're absolutely right, it's demonstrating that the versions of Marxism that the financial ruling class and the bourgeois states wanted to promote was a version of Marxism that could be used as an ideological weapon of war against anti-imperialist Marxism or real Marxism. But at the same time, the question of the relationship between subject and system, I think, always has to be approached dialectically, in the sense that I'm not trying to explain why Marcuse or Adorno, for instance, thought particular ideas as if you could trace it back and find one source point for that, and it would be, oh, they got a Ford grant or a Rockefeller grant or anything like that. Instead, what I'm trying to provide is a dialectical and historical materialist analysis of the organic social totality within which these individuals operated, in order to elucidate the fact that the liberal ideology that consists in saying there's only two options is incorrect. The one option is you have a free intellectual who decides on their own what ideas they're going to think. And the opposite of that is you have some determined structure, some conspiracy on the outside that is forcing them to or determining the ways in which they think in various ways. This binary of determinism, reductionism versus the freedom of the individual is not only liberal ideology, it is incorrect materially. There are not isolated individuals who think on their own and come up with their ideas, nor is there just some external system hovering over us and reductively determining everything that we do. Instead, there's a dialectical, intertwining of subjects and systems that functions so organically that the system produces certain subjects who are producing themselves while they are contributing to the transformation of the system. And so we need that broader kind of organic dialectical understanding of how, when you have a system like the imperial superstructure that is trying to develop forms of leftist intellectual work that are compatible with capitalism and imperialism, it makes perfect sense, given the reward system within that imperial superstructure, that certain intellectuals would gravitate in that direction. And so one of the ways I describe this in the book is one of the driving forces behind many intellectuals is opportunism. They want to be famous. They want to get jobs at Harvard. They want, yeah, you're smiling. You're like, no, it's not that. Yeah, everybody who knows academics is like, well, their principal quality or lack thereof, is being opportunists. But what the system provides is uplift. And so there's a kind of dialectical relationship between the two, where if you give to the system what it wants, you tend to get advancement within that system. And there's complexities to this and contradictions that can operate. But overall, I think that we have to get out of the idea that is prominent in certain forms of the sociology of knowledge, of it's either the individual produced ideas or it's just an external system. It's actually an organic dialectical system in which agency continues to function, but systems also condition the way in which those agents operate, if that makes sense. I think I'm at the end of my time, so I'll turn it back over to Sina.
And I'll turn it over to Justin.
So I know not everybody can see the front, but when Gabriel mentioned Chomsky, he pointed to me. So I feel like, I feel like I want to talk about what Gabriel, what resonates, like many commentators. I've read the book. I finished it today. But what Gabriel did for me is, what he can do for you is to help you retrain your mind when you've been indoctrinated or miseducated, as it turns out I have been. Part of that is, like, with respect to Chomsky, it seems to me a big part of Chomsky, when I'm taking it personally, is he didn't really mean most of the things that he said. So, going back and questioning what parts of what he said are still valid is a process that I am going to have to go through, because it's not necessarily the case that everything he wrote in his books is wrong. It's just that he didn't really mean it, or at least he didn't mean it from whatever 2016 on. What, I don't know. This could have been more devastating for me than it was, but I have had to do some of this retraining of my mind anyway over the past few years. And the way that I've done it, and probably many of you have done the same thing, is the resistance intellectuals. Yahya Sinwar's book. How does Yahya Sinwar understand the relationship between the Palestinian resistance and the Israelis? The way that he understands how security culture or personal integrity or, education, taking care of your family, taking care of your extended family, all of those things are part of the resistance, as you can read in The Thorn and the Carnation. Nasrallah was an intellectual. Nasrallah was, I think, one of the greatest intellectuals that we've ever had. When Gabriel talks about uplifting certain intellectuals, they dropped 80 tons of bombs. They dropped more bombs to kill Nasrallah than anybody's ever dropped to kill a single person. That was because of his intellectual work. That was because of his speeches, how he understood what the war was, what the equation was, how can you deter, how can you resist a vastly militarily superior foe in this context. Not enough people listen to Abdel Malik al-Houthi, the leader of Ansar Allah. That's an intellectual service that he provides with his every 2 Thursdays or every Thursday speeches. How they understood solidarity. When they said they were training people, they were preparing for different possibilities. I think at some point they were probably preparing to invade Israel. They were, and it could still happen, who knows? But he talked about what they were preparing, what they were doing, how they understood what the responsibility of Muslims was. When they would fire a missile to Israel, they said, we fired this Jaffa drone or this Palestine 2 missile to our occupied lands. That's a naming of an understanding of what the relationship of Ansar Allah, what the relationship of Yemen is, what the relationship of Arabs is and should be. It's prescriptive. When Abu Ubaidah gave his speeches, it was at some time, it was always about the heroism, how they understood heroism, how they understood what it means to be courageous, how they understood the relationship between civilians and the military, right? They would always say, our people, we are with you. The fighters are with you. They suffer as you suffer. Those are all elements of a worldview, of a kind of intellectualism that
Organic.
yeah, or that is everything that Western Marxism that Gabriel's describing is not. And for this audience here tonight, Toronto being what it is, one of the things Gabriel says is he talks about frameworks, and he says, the CIA, the imperialists understood that if you can implant a framework, then if you hold a framework in your mind, you will resist facts that don't fit that framework. And so some of these frameworks around here are, that there's a third way. I feel like Gabriel's book shows that there's no third way. If you're anti-communist, if you're anti any of these actual countries that are targeted, whether it's Venezuela or Iran or Syria or the Palestinians, Lebanon, Ansar Allah, Yemen, then you're working for the imperialists. There's no third way. Human rights is a framework. You talk about human rights, but only in those countries that are targeted. We're never doing a full global review of human rights, because if you did a full global review of human rights, you would find that any of these countries is meh. They're not too bad and they're not too great. Like, they're right in the middle. Are you going to invade and destroy a country because it's right in the middle of this list of 150 countries? No, you wouldn't. But human rights is this useful framework. And, last, again, for Toronto, your identity, your lived experience in the diaspora that trumps reason, that trumps data, that trumps reality, because, you're from there and you have that background, or you have a friend that's of that background. And all of those things are frameworks that cancel the ability to actually understand the world through what Gabriel always calls a materialist analysis. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Justin. Oh, yeah.
I'll just do a respond quick.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks so much, Justin. Really appreciate it. I'll just say quickly with Chomsky, because it relates to a theme of the book. In a dialectical analysis, you have to recognize that subjects are just nodal points within an objective world that's rather complex. They have different sets of relations, and you have to account for the temporal vector because they do change over time. And so the idea of just identifying an intellectual and kind of sticking them to the wall like you'd put the pin in the back of a dead butterfly doesn't really make any sense, because it doesn't account for both the complexity of the relations and the temporal vector. In the case of Chomsky, obviously he was a very smart person who was capable of doing interesting forms of analysis. And there's a lot that one could say on that front. And I know he brings a lot of young people in particular into politics in general. But on the flip side of it, if you know his history, he worked and was funded by the defense industry, the Air Force. He was at MIT doing work that was directly related to, even though he was always trying to separate it in various ways, the military-industrial complex. He also was close personal friends with someone who became the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. And Epstein, it's important to note, is just a limited hangout, right? What's important about Epstein in the big picture is who he was working for, who he was working with, and the entire network that they are very intent on not revealing and not dismantling. All of the things that are being revealed, raping 10-year-olds, torturing people, likely disappearing them, that is going on now, and they're intent on continuing it because that's the morality of the ruling class, and in particular, the decadent bourgeoisie that thinks all of you and all of us are disposable things and they can do anything with us. And in fact, it's enjoyable to use us as disposable things and trash human life. This is the morality of the ruling class that is the most powerful imperialist ruling class on earth today. I got a little carried away there with that point. I think I was talking about Chomsky, right? And Epstein. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is that he was a resolute anti-communist, of course, insisted on Lenin being a counter-revolutionary, which, I don't know, you got to flip history upside down to make that argument. And he was a free speech advocate and wanted to make sure that fascists always had their platform like a good liberal, right? You never want to shut down the free speech for fascists because fascists always have to be maintained when the liberal rule of consensus under capitalism falls apart and you got to bring in the rough guys. He also played a very important role in pushing back against any materialist analysis that suggested that, in particular, the US state was involved in very nefarious things such as targeted assassinations, false flag operations, terrorist attacks against its own citizen population, etc. But I'll just move on in the interest of time to, I really appreciated your comments regarding all of the different forms of organic intellectuals from whom we can and need to learn, because ultimately part of the lesson of my book isn't that we should wring our hands and think, oh, there's all these compromised Western Marxists, what am I going to do about it? The whole framing is a positive framing. There is a very rich, extremely developed collective tradition of anti-imperialist Marxism that's extremely developed across the global South. We have a lot to learn from that tradition, and part of the imperial superstructure's work has been invisibilizing, sidelining, and downplaying it. So everybody knows who Foucault is, but who knows who Raúl Antonio Capote is? Everybody knows who Derrida is, but nobody's reading, I don't know, Antonio Barrero Vasquez or Nestor Cohan or many, many other people that we need to be reading and need to bring to the fore. And the last thing that I'd say is, yeah, there is no third way. We are in a pitched global class struggle in which there's an imperialist world system which is extracting value from the human beings and nature at such a level of social murder that it is pushing humanity to a complete and absolute breaking point. And the question for all of us is actually very simple. Intellectuals love to say it's very complicated. There's all these nuances. You can look at it from every angle. Maybe there aren't two camps. No, it's actually very simple. There's an imperialist world system that is demolishing the conditions of possibility of human life. And you either support that directly, condone it, or find other ways of supporting it implicitly. Or you line up and you say, I'm on the side of humanity. I'm on the side of nature. And what I want is a world where we can all live in some way a dignified life in which we have access to basic goods and services, and where we don't have this plundering, corrupt, decadent, immoral financial ruling class that is intent on and is literally strangling all of us.
Thanks very much. Before I hand it off, Sarah, I just want to say there's a great tweet that's like the center of my life right now, which was, there's no liberals now anymore. There's no more liberalism. It's just fascism and communism. That's it. And it's just like every 10 seconds it's looping in my brain. Sardana, you get the final word.
Yes. Thank you for having me and inviting. And I haven't finished the book, so I apologize. I'm going to finish this soon, but I'm not going to write reviews, so that's okay. That's okay. I would just like wanted to share some thoughts that I had when I started reading the book. Firstly, I was thinking about that. Like most of the conversations about this book and also the different episodes that Gabriel you did with the different podcasts. Most of the conversations they're focusing on the impact of framings of Western Marxism on the left within the Western societies. But I was thinking about how that we also need to talk about how these kind of framings and the writings and the publications based on understandings of Western Marxism, how they impact societies outside the West. Because most of these publications, they actually write about non-Western societies, right? Because they actually existed socialisms, they existed outside the West. So, I was thinking about why people don't have conversations, how these publications impact the development of the societies in other places. Like, for example, I grew up during the Soviet Union. I'm this old. So, I'm mostly educated within the Western academia, and I had to read a lot of these different Marxists and also non-Marxists, like academics, a lot of anthropologists, because I did my graduate studies in anthropology. And a lot of the writings about specifically my home region. I grew up in the Sakha Republic, which is the northeastern part of Russia, which is like in the close to the Arctic. It's kind of like essentially it's the Arctic. And I'm reading all of these different anthropological writings about my people, like my communities, and I'm reading them and I'm thinking that, this doesn't sound right, because they're essentially writing about the experiences of my communities, but it doesn't resonate with my actual experiences when I was growing up. To the point that a lot of the people, when they read these, very writings in a very authoritative voice, because we're talking about these very well-known anthropologists within the Western academia who publish a lot about the non-Western places, like indigenous peoples, like my communities and such. So, when I was reading that, I had this, I guess like they call it like cognitive dissonance, right? Like I was like, this is not actually what happened. This is like all the different fantasies of the Western anthropologists and the other social scientists about the far-flung places, like in these exotic communities, especially indigenous communities. So, and some of the impacts is not necessarily that I was impacted by that, because, I actually had these experiences, but I know a lot of the young scholars who have internalized this produced knowledge by the outsiders, by the Western anthropologists, by the Western social scientists. And I recently had this this conversation with one of my friends, and she met this girl from the same region as I am, at Harvard University, actually.
I've seen you.
And she's very young. Like she grew up she was born in 1990s, and she like grew up in 1990s and 2000s. So she didn't necessarily like caught that time of the communist period. So and my friend asked her. So apparently that girl, she knew the special study that I did on diamond mining industry in my home region. So apparently she liked the study and she appreciated it. But one of the most important questions, according to her, that she asked my friend was she pro-Soviet? So apparently it was like the question that was nagging her. And my friend, like she knows me, and she was like, yeah, obviously, right? and and then like my friend asked her, like, what about you? Like, what do you think? And apparently her answer was that, oh, like I grew up, like in 1990s, 2000s, so that's why I didn't experience that time. So like I don't actually have that lived experience. However, I feel that it was bad. And I was like, okay. And it's like, so this is the like the direct impact of these kind of publications, of the knowledge produced within the Western academia that has on this like educated kids, like, and the who come from the former Soviet republics. So I think like it's necessary to talk about the overarching impact of again of this knowledge produced within the Western academia, specifically about the like the actually existing socialist countries before and now. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that as the result of the like this knowledge is essentially is propaganda, right? Like anti-communist and the socialist propaganda, and it didn't not only affect the people in the West, like the leftists and the majority of the people, but also it deeply affected indigenous communities. Okay, indigenous communities in North America, for example, because in my encounters with a lot of the indigenous activists here, there is a red line, and it is red line. It's communism. So it's like it's very, very similar, and like it surprises me every time because like when you're indigenous, I'm not saying like it's naturally you become communist, like but still, like you have more inclinations to be communist like than anyone else, like how I see that. However, and one of the things that I was thinking about when I started reading the book is that like how much collaboration we have lost, like as indigenous peoples in the Soviet Union and in Russia right now, and also with the indigenous communities, with the indigenous activists here in North America, and not only in North America, but also in other places. Not because of the fact that we didn't reach out, we reached out all the time. Like I consider my communities to be, like very internationalist. And we have been internationalists for a very long time. However, when like within the indigenous communities, you don't necessarily see that, and I find that to be very disappointing because there's so much things to for us to learn from each other, as like as relatives, like as comrades, like, and also as people who have, I wouldn't say like the same, but very similar experiences as indigenous peoples, especially within the circumpolar north. Okay, so I guess like I'm out of time. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. I should say I'm really honored and touched by all of the comments of all three panelists, and as well by the political integrity and the kind of generous engagement with my scholarship, but then also plugging it into the kind of larger issues. Because ultimately, I'm just an individual trying to contribute to a collective struggle that's intellectual and political, and it's great to engage with people like all of you. So thank you. Regarding the effects outside of the West, I thought that was a really interesting way of framing some of the issues that the book raises, because one of the ways that cultural imperialism functions is that it overdevelops the system of intellectual production in the imperial core while underdeveloping that of the periphery, and creating a kind of value relation in which the leading intellectuals of the global South are encouraged due to material and symbolic forces to go and study at Oxford and Harvard and Cambridge, etc. They're then exposed to the leading cutting edge ideas, and they don't say what's in parentheses of the empire. Right? They're just the leading and cutting edge ideas. And then often they'll either stay as representatives of Pakistan or South Africa or wherever in the imperial core, and often engage in the kind of identitarian games that Justin was alluding to earlier, or they'll return to where they came from with their acquired advanced knowledge and use it to then disseminate Foucault and Adorno in places where there is no use value for these ideas. There is no real traction you could get in material struggles. And that's a very important way in which cultural imperialism functions. It also serves to prop up a comprador intellectual labor aristocracy in the periphery. And you can chart out these value chains where you have someone like Judith Butler in the North, and then some Argentine scholars, and they get invited to the North through the money, through Mellon that they have access to, and vice versa. And everybody's value gets leveraged up. So the people in the imperial core look all global Southy and whatnot, and then all of the global South people get invited to Berkeley or wherever. And that whole system needs to be called out for what it is. It's an imperial system of knowledge production, and the principal forces driving it are imperialism, but imperialism as it manifests itself within the zone of the production of knowledge and its dissemination. I also really appreciated kind of what you alluded to, which is that there's such a tendency to insist, particularly in the fields, I'm trained in philosophy, but also the historical social sciences, that if you were to formulate a critique of Adorno, you might be able to do that if you read all of Adorno's work, you learn German, you spend your life in the archive, you read all the secondary literature, you read all of the tertiary literature, and any critique that you could possibly formulate would only be a small annotation based on some debates in the tertiary literature. That is the kind of overall framework of critique. At the same time, you can make references directly to the entire tradition of Marxism, the entire tradition of actually existing socialism, not reference or even study anything about any of these traditions, and have it just be accepted as a natural given. This is a clear manifestation of dogmatism. In fact, many people will say, we don't even have to study it because we know it's wrong. Well, how do you know it's wrong if you don't study it? And so part of what my book advocates for is, let's just democratically open up the spectrum of analysis. Maybe we should look objectively at actually existing socialism and study things like, I don't know, the physical quality of life index, in which, according to World Bank data, in almost every single instance, socialist countries outperform capitalist countries. That's kind of interesting, meaning longer life expectancy, lower infant mortality, higher literacy rates. Interesting data that we should all know and that we should study in greater detail. The very last thing that I wanted to say is I appreciated the kind of encouragement for the need for collaboration, because at the end of the day, the opportunism of the imperial theory industry encourages all of us to brand ourselves. And I suffer from this. You've been very honest and humble in your kind of self-critique around Chomsky. The origin of this book is a self-critique. I was an opportunist intellectual who was trained to, ideally be the next Derrida. Then I realized, wow, I can't really be that much of a charlatan. So maybe I'll aim for being the next Rancière. No, that's not going to work out either. And so anyway, there are lots of conflicts and self-critique involved, but a lot of that had to do with the recognition that the ideas that were on offer have exchange value and marketing potential for branding intellectuals and getting them to sell their goods. The theory industry functions like any other industry. Just because it's high bourgeois culture doesn't mean that it functions according to different rules. That's part of bourgeois ideology. And so what we need is a culture based on use value. And use value of the dialectical and historical materialist tradition is innovative, it is rich, there is so much to learn and so much important collective work to do. And it's integral to all of us to recognize that reigniting the flames of that tradition are essential and have nothing whatsoever to do with all the stereotypes about dogmatic reductionism and simplistic dogmatism and all of this. These are all cases of projection. That's what they're doing.
It might be too short. We might have to repeat it.
Question, and then Sina,
Ooh, we got a lot of questions.
into the mic for anyone who can hear.
Go ahead.
Thank you so much for everything. I really learned a lot today. My name's Timmy, and I'm a part of the American Communist Party, and we're a part of the Ontario chapter. And I was very much interested in learning a little bit more about, what we as young people can do in terms of, thinking more dialectically and kind of working in society to kind of push anti-imperialism and anti-establishment and such. And would you also be open to working with those who are not necessarily intellectuals by any means to push these thoughts?
Okay, we'll take it. And then right behind. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
So I just want to start off with a quick remark. Just as you hate Verso, I hate Jacobin. Anyway.
Baby Verso.
Mr. Rockhill, in your estimation, would you say that the individuals that you've named in your book also contributed, despite that there's various histories and contexts that play into this, do you think they've also played a role in the development of Euro-communism from the 70s on the communist parties that existed in that realm?
In the back? It won't reach.
Okay. I'll try my best. So, I just wanted a quick show of hands, if possible. How many academics are in the room? Okay, there's quite a few of us here. This is good. So, I guess my question is, I really, really appreciate that you, Gabriel, shared that this book comes from a place of self-criticism. We love self-crit. That's awesome. I think one of my questions is, maybe could we hear some reflections on what is and you've already shared this with the opportunism bit, the class character of Western Marxist academics. What are their class interests and what is their connection to practice? We are a part of a Marxist-Leninist organization, and one of the things we really struggle with is, sure, we are PhD candidates. It would be so I think helpful to have seasoned tenure-track academics helping us with practice, right? Bringing that theory and practice together. And I don't know that happens enough. And I would love to hear more of that self-criticism and that insight. Thank you.
One more.
Should we take one more?
Okay, three.
We can take one more.
Gabe says one more.
Oh, okay.
Sure.
My question kind of relates to the first one in that, what would you say is the best mechanism or procedure to kind of promote the socialist intellectual tradition of the global south to the mainstream? If you mentioned Foucault, what would we do? What would be the best way to bring those scholars to the forefront of our public attention in this imperial society? Kind of now that we're coming out of the sunken cost fallacy of Chomsky, I've been meaning to wish my condolences.
Thank you, Maya. Thanks so much for the rich questions. I see there's a number of other hands, so I'm going to try to be as quick as possible. Apologies in advance. I'm happy to discuss afterward if I leave important things out. I'll just go sequentially. Regarding dialectical thought, I think that it's really important to always situate your subjective agency within the material, objective reality within which you're operating. And within the imperial core, the current play of forces is such that the right is predominant and the left is an imperialist left. And what we need is a rejuvenation of the real left, but we have to be honest and realistic about the size of that real left, because there is a lot of what people refer to as ultra-leftism that takes many different forms, but one of them is a form of leftism in which you perform being the most communist person ever or the most radical person ever, and you don't actually do a concrete analysis of the concrete situation, and you're not invested in the long-term struggle of building power in such a way that your subjective agency can be enhanced because you have the structures and the organizational form necessary in order to do that. That is the long and difficult road of organizing. There's not a way around it. Do I work with, yeah, I have worked with a lot of different organizations in different capacities. I think it's absolutely essential to overcome the dominant ideology on a lot of the left, which says we shouldn't organize as parties, maybe we shouldn't even get organized at all, we shouldn't focus on state power. If you think about it for just a second, if you're in a war, and we're in a war, it's a class war that's global, and you have one team that is highly organized, extremely disciplined, constantly trained in forms of hierarchical organization, so everybody in that organization marches in lockstep. And then you have the other team that decides that everybody can just kind of freely do what they want, and we don't need any organization, and structure's bad because it's dominating. Who's going to win that war? It's very clear who's going to win that war. And that's also one of the reasons that a lot of the imperialist forces actually are fine with versions of anarchism or disorganized politics in various ways. Did these thinkers contribute to Eurocommunism? And I'll maybe connect this to one of the later questions as well. If you look at the history of revisionism, understood as how the fundamental principles of Marxism and Marxism-Leninism were perverted due to material forces of imperialism and also to ideological elements, then the early revisionists that Lenin was critical of were very involved in organized politics, right? They were leaders of major political parties, and they were boots on the ground. They were revisionists, though, because they ended up supporting, usually in various ways, colonialism, the imperialist wars, etc. That was their version of imperialism. I'm sorry, of revisionism. By the time you get to the kind of mid-20th century and later, a lot of that revisionism gets even worse because it retracts from any engagement in practical politics whatsoever, and it withdraws within the academy. So when you look at Western Marxists like Adorno and Horkheimer, they had no connection to organized politics whatsoever. There are tiny things that... Yeah, they're
literally called the cops.
Well, called the cops, and one element that I point out in the book that often people don't get in this story is, you know who was standing next to Adorno when he called the cops? Anyone familiar with this? A gentleman by the name of Ludwig von Friedeberg. Who was that guy? Well, he had served 11 years as a Nazi before being a former Nazi for 9 years. And then he was integrated into the Frankfurt School, quickly moved into leadership positions, and then became the longest-serving director of the Institute for Social Research. So it's not just that he called the cops. And meanwhile, they were accusing the students of being left fascists, right? According to Habermas, and Adorno used that term as well.
People might not know this story.
Of the
arrest and all that stuff, but
yeah, I don't know if anybody wants a quick history lesson or if I should move on in the interest of time. I mean, in short, the students were organizing to demonstrate that actually, I mean, there are a number of in Frankfurt, it was anti-imperialist, but then it was also pointing out that the German state had fascist elements in it. If you know the history of the German state, they did not denazify in any serious way in the West. They only did it in the East. The students were right, just to cut to the chase. And so the people they were accusing of left fascists, meanwhile, these were people who were working with fascists, not only in the Frankfurt School, but also they had a whole series of collaborations in the broader intellectual world. And so you see the world is upside down in this case. All of this to say then that a lot of that form of revisionism became a kind of academic revisionism that was just completely disconnected from class struggle and even from Eurocommunism, right? Which itself was a form of revisionism within organized politics. The class character of Western Marxists is essential, but we also have to understand that class character in two senses. One is that if you're an academic in the imperial core, You're not paid usually like a lawyer or a doctor or a banker or something like this. But compared to other intellectuals around the world, you are part of the intellectual labor aristocracy. The material conditions of your life are far superior to the majority of intellectuals in the world, even those who have full-time academic positions. What that means is that there's an imperial class dynamic, as well as the class dynamic that comes from being part of the middle layer or the managerial class stratum. All of this tends to foster particular ideologies. When you're on the left spectrum of this middle imperialist layer, what you often want to do is appear to be on the side of the people, the oppressed, because it sounds good, it looks good, and in certain cases, people do believe in these things. But what they often don't want is to give up on the material conditions of superiority and the symbolic conditions of superiority, because at the end of the day, they have the best conditions of work and they're going to go down in bourgeois history as the leading thinkers of their day. Who would want to destroy that system? You'd have to commit class suicide. And if you read Marx and Lenin closely, they talk a lot about the importance of petty bourgeois or bourgeois intellectuals committing class suicide because they identify really and truly with the people. We don't have a lot of that in the world that we live in. Horkheimer's father was a millionaire. Adorno's father was a wealthy, was he a wine merchant? I know he was wealthy. I mean, he come from the upper class. The last thing that I'd say is what can we do to promote the kind of global South Marxism? One of the things that's important to do is look what the ruling class does, right? They use violence indiscriminately all the time. And they tell people who are resisting, don't use violence. That's interesting. Well, that seems to be working out for all of you. Why is it? And this relates to the nonviolent project we were talking about earlier. But then what they also do is they own the means of intellectual production and communication. So one of the tasks, we'll give a shout out to Adnan here, to Justin's podcast, to the work that Sina's doing, to all of the alternative platforms that are being developed that are extremely important. We have to seize at least start to develop as much as possible a counter-hegemonic means of intellectual production and distribution. And we need as many people involved in that struggle as possible. We can't do this alone. We need to do it collectively, and we need to be able to have the instruments, the tools, the infrastructure necessary to fight the cultural and intellectual war in such a way that we make serious gains. Ultimately, the horizon of that struggle needs to be that we need a socialist intellectual apparatus. But to get there, if you're serious about getting there, you need state power. And that brings us back to the broader organizing question and the relationship ultimately between intellectual class struggle and the role of intellectual class struggle in the broader class struggle, because the ultimate purpose of intellectual class struggle, as Marx often said, ideas take on force in the world when they come to grip the masses, right? So we have to bring people in, provide political education while learning from the people in order to move the struggle to the next level. That's going to be a process.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, for sure.
So I just wanted to add a little story because Gabriel was talking about the opportunism of academics and academics' fundamental quality being opportunism. But I think one of the other fundamental qualities of academics is cowardice. And so I really think that cowardice, it's something I understand,
as a coward,
as self-identification, and like, I know I'm a coward because when I read somebody like George Jackson, who was killed in prison, I know that by that stand, like, I can't measure up to that standard. But my point is, like, those people understand that there's no third way. Like George Jackson specifically says, there's no third way. And like a part of the desperate search for a third way is cowardice. It's like, if I don't align myself directly against this murderous, pedophilic, genocidal, all-encompassing apparatus, then maybe I can, get away with it. Maybe I can have a little life and like sort of, live my life. So obviously that is something that's a bigger deal. And the only thing that can help you overcome that is that there might be other people doing that with you. So, what's adventurism for one person or 10 people is, just a day at the office for 10,000 people or 100,000 people. So
Okay, we have more questions. Sure, go ahead. We'll take a few at a time. Quick.
We talked about the pro-Palestine movement and how it's not necessarily rooted in anti maybe I should stand up.
Yeah.
The question is, I mean, we have here the most sustained protest movement, I don't know, in our lifetime, in terms of global reach, in terms of time, in terms of impact. The question is, do we feel, or did it really have this impact in exposing the material conditions and the systems that are producing that type of intellectualism, in the sense that, all of a sudden centers of power want to pull funding, fire people, etc. Did that work in the direction of rehydrating that kind of Marxism that you are trying to rehydrate?
Okay, thanks. In the back?
Can you maybe speak on, because I know that like in academia, the other component of the university is the production of like useful workers to work in corporate settings, in white collar settings, and increasingly those corporate settings don't have training because they immediately put that labor on the universities to produce the workers that it needs to continue the industrial process. How does that sort of interact with the academic production of, the compliant left, as it were?
Okay, beside you? Yeah.
I'm wondering, we live in a framework here with roots that are so rotten. And when you mention breaking points, it really catches me, because we've already moved past the 2.5 Celsius recommendation for global warming. Our world in 40 years, 30 years from now is going to look so much different. Education might take a downturn with things like AI, degrading everything that we know. And I'm wondering, what could it take to really get to that breaking point, to where, as education, like we need to educate the people, so we don't reach that breaking point and take a bad turn, as in post-war Germany, post-World War I. But more so, thoughts on how to fight to this better world as it rapidly changes, and wars are definitely on the horizon.
Okay, just one more. Who's been up for a while? Be honest. Over there? Yeah, go for it.
Hi. I was recently comparing the statements of different communist parties on the protests in Iran. And I noticed that the Communist Party of Canada and the Communist Party of Britain and sort of other Western ones made note within the first couple of lines about how it's theocratic and how they support the protesters. I also noticed that in Cuba, they didn't really release a statement, to my knowledge, and the Communist Party of Marxist Kenya released a statement talking mostly about the sanctions.
Yeah,
and
Booker.
I can't help but feel like these Western Communist parties, because they're so small, they feel like their outlet is more about putting a correct statement rather than viewing themselves as a part of the war, and thus their statements are propaganda. And I think that one thing this book is really good for is being a piece of propaganda. How can we, with our comrades here, make them realize that actually what they have to say is important, but not because it's right, but because it's a tool in these sort of anti-imperialist wars?
Thank you.
I'll try to be quick because I saw there were more hands, and also we have some really brilliant speakers up here, so anybody should feel free to chime in. I'm just going to go through them relatively quickly, and I hope I understood all of them. So did the struggle against the genocide in the Middle East rehydrate in certain ways the anti-imperialist Marxist tradition? I would say that there are clear signs of radicalization, while at the same time, depending on the context, and I can primarily speak from the context in which I'm situated in the broader Philadelphia area, I feel that a lot of it has been driven by a kind of moral horror at what's being done to the Palestinian people and in the broader region. And that needs to be connected to a broader framework of analysis of imperialism, which is present in many of the analyses, like we were talking about the Anti-Imperialist Scholars Network, which is doing excellent work. There's a number of intellectuals, Max Eil came up, other people like this, who are doing fantastic work. Ali Qadri's work, everybody should know. But we really have in not only a extreme political crisis, but also an incredible opportunity for political education, to allow people to connect the moral outrage to anti-imperialist understanding of the world and ultimately to anti-imperialist organizing. And I think there's still a lot more work that needs to be done to build that up and to have the organizations necessary to fight more successfully. Regarding university labor, if I understood the question correctly, there are ways in which the material conditions of work within the university are themselves quintessential tools for disciplining the intellectuals who operate within them, right? We have all of the adjunct, precarious labor, underpaid labor. All of this is to render the material conditions of intellectual production so precarious that people are much more likely to try to give to the system what it wants so that they can patch a life together for themselves. This is actually spelled out very explicitly in a 1985 CIA paper, which applauds this kind of rendering precarious of the intellectual class, as well as the need to shift away from any forms of learning that have to do basically with humanity in favor of business interests, economic interests, and all of this. Climate change is essential to everything that we're going through, and we need to understand that the fundamental driver behind the ecocide is imperialism, and the way to fight the collapse of the ecosphere is, or the biosphere, is through anti-imperialism. I hope that we all know that right now, globally, the leader in renewable energy and at so many different levels is not the United States that denies the very existence of human-made climate change, but it's China. Cuba is also breaking a ton of records under an imperialist stranglehold regarding sustainability. We need to break the chains of imperialism if we're going to be serious about stopping the ecological crisis. The primary contradiction, it is what is driving history, and that's why we need that front and center in the struggle to, well, save the planet, in short. It's really interesting what you pointed out, and I'm glad that you've been charting out the history, the kind of CP positions of the different countries, and it's not surprising that Booker in Kenya and the Kenyan party would take these positions. I think it's highly revealing of the ways in which a lot of the parties in the core have suffered from revisionism, and they also operate within a context in which the dominant propaganda is so widespread that people feel like they have to kind of, at a minimum, tip their hat to the dominant ideology, and they don't stand up for a kind of critical engagement with what's actually going on in Iran, where you have the intelligence agencies, they say it openly. They are fomenting the overthrow of the government, and they're marshaling and weaponizing members of ISIS, Mujahideen, and many of the people who have been killed have been state forces. Like, there's a lot of very clear material on what's going on in Iran. And so it would be great if some of the parties could take a stronger anti-imperialist position and shed some of the kind of imperial revisionism, if you will.
Thank you. We have I think 10 more minutes left, right? 10? Does anybody want to add something? Okay, let's take two more questions. Two more. Go ahead. Loud.
All right. My name is Malad. I'm from the student movement, former student activist. There are a lot of people here from the encampments and from our Palestine clubs. My question to you is, from what you've seen of the struggle on campus, what do you think generally that they did well? Where do you think they're falling behind? Where are we tailing? Or, I don't know if you're familiar with Palestine Action, but have you seen anything too adventurous? Like, yeah. What have you seen as well?
Okay, one more. Go ahead, yeah.
This is a question kind of for all of the panelists, but I was just wondering if you could share some reflections on engaging in this battle of ideas while also living in a society where the ruling class is also waging a war on people's attention spans and ability to think in the first place.
Great questions.
To Russia?
Do you guys? Why don't each of you take one of the questions and then Gabe will finish.
Yeah, that sounds perfect.
If you want.
Especially because they're hard questions.
If you want.
Milad's question. A lot of people talk about the repression of the encampments, and obviously, repression works. They wouldn't do it if it didn't work. A lot of the great things that communists have done in the world have been crushed by repression. You know, it's not a factor we have too much say over. I think a lot of what liberals do is blame. A lot of the nonviolence ideology is basically just to blame the people that are being crushed for being crushed. You weren't nonviolent, blah, blah, blah. I don't believe that at all. But I do have a critique of our movement. And I have had this critique for a long time, and I've lost a lot of friends. And that I can sum it up in one word, which is Syria. And Syria provided the imperialists, the Israelis, with an opportunity to split the Palestine movement at will. Anytime they want, and they can do it anytime, they can do it again. I was amazed in 2024 that they were able to do it again. And I realized they can just do it anytime. Anytime they want, they can get the Palestine people to be at each other's throats because half or more accept what I've been calling the human rights framework of, oh, this was a and Assad is gone now. Assad is gone. Assad is in Russia somewhere being a dentist. And Assad is sorry, yeah. Who's a dentist? Your mom is a dentist. Sorry. And he's still to blame. The people in the Palestine movement are still blaming him for what's going on in Syria. That is the level of internalized propaganda. That's something we can control. And that's something that the student movement has fallen for almost hook, line, and sinker. And yeah, Iran is another example. We support the Palestinians, but we don't support anybody that supports the Palestinians. We want the regime we want the regime that has provided arms and training and suffered and been bombed and launched essentially the only effective military attack on Israel to fall and be destroyed and be fragmented and have a genocide committed against the party in power. That's how much we believe in human rights, that we're willing to sacrifice all of that, even though we're Palestine people. So that is my critique of the Palestine movement. It's my only critique of I will never have anything bad to say about Palestine Action. I will never have anything bad to say about the students at the encampments, but I will have that bad to say about that issue.
No, you can go. Wait, it's been a while since you did anything.
Okay, I guess. Okay.
Of course, yeah.
No, I guess maybe I'll just say something on the universities and the intellectual production stuff and kind of what do we do in terms of how we approach this. I mean, I think, right, it's important to note that this, this is not us taking a kind of anti-intellectualist position, right? Because that's a common critique where people say, well, look, if you're criticizing, the dominant intellectual production in academia, then, you're also feeding into this general anti-intellectualism, which is something obviously to think about, that there is a kind of public discourse being pushed against the universities. And I think, it's a tricky issue too, because the fact that, the universities are at least in principle open for people who are not, from the ruling elite to go and study the humanities. If you go on to write a dissertation on the Odyssey, historically that was not possible, right? So actually that's the product of social struggle as well to have. So it's a question of trying to preserve that space, but also I think creating parallel institutions. And I think we should never think that the university is the only place where you can do serious intellectual work. And even if you take kind of, just the canon of modern philosophy, if anyone, Descartes, Spinoza, all of these people, none of them were in universities. I mean, actually, there was a period, the early modern period up to the 18th century, where the universities in Europe were considered a very backward place intellectually. That if you wanted to do anything interesting, you don't go to a university. So I think, we have precedents for thinking of intellectual production outside the universities.
Just very briefly, I was just going to say, we had the conversation about academics being opportunistic, and I'm trying to be opportunist, but no one lets me. Because it seems that I already have, very bad rep, so I guess because of that. But I was thinking of the question about the AI and also the social media, right? In these conversations, I noticed that when people talk about the impact of social media, in the political activism within social media, using social media, different social media platforms, in AI development and such, I noticed they kind of universalize, these conversations, they coming from the assumption that everyone has access to internet, and everyone is on TikTok or everyone on Instagram and such, and I usually say when people have talk about the importance of Instagram, for example, for political activism, is that I literally come from the place, where internet is very sparse, and as far as I know, none of my friends have Twitter, or they don't have any interest, in TikTok. And I'm talking about, younger, students or the older people. So, I will be very cautious, when I think about the social media and political activism, because I feel like here in the West, for some reason, young people and also older people, they think that political activism is posting something on Instagram. And I was like, it is not. It is believe me, it is not. And I learned that, from the indigenous grandmothers, who are very active political activists within their communities. And they don't post on Instagram, and they are not on TikTok, but they have done the most effective political, social, and the cultural activism with their communities and also at the region at large. So what I'm trying to say, because we talked about the praxis, right? And we have to somehow, if you're ideologically, if you have some kind of ideology, preferably communist ideology or socialist ideology, so you have to somehow apply it, right? And and you have to apply it in a very practical way. And also, there's a question about the, how to educate people. So I feel like I remember that when I was doing my field work, and talking to these women, indigenous women, elders of their communities, and they're telling me about all of these years of them being involved in political activism, within the villages that they lived in. And one of the things that they mentioned a lot is just they used to have these groups, very grassroots local activist groups, and they would go to the very remote villages in the Arctic, in the high Arctic, and they would bring them books, newspapers, and the different, and the show different performances, about the and teach them what is happening in the world. So it's I know it's very simple, but at the same time it worked. And the how I see the most politically active and politically conscious people that I have met in my life were these grandmothers. And some of them they didn't have any higher education, but they're the most politically conscious people that I have ever met in my life. And imagine they like they were from the villages, very remote rural villages in the Arctic. So I guess, like you just need to somehow apply the ideas that we have. Like I'm not trying to be, like moralizing or whatever, but like this is just like something that what I have learned. Okay, thank you.
I just have the one comment about attention spans. This is my own thing with podcasting, is that I'm like a podcaster, obviously, and I produce most of my work is producing other people's shows. And so I track consumption of those shows, and you're seeing it. You're seeing like people cannot hold it. Like maybe that's my shows. Maybe it's something about my shows that sucks. Maybe, I don't know. But it's getting harder and harder to hold people. You have to use you have to throw things at them. You have to clip things in. It's like a baby monitor. You have to have something rolling in front of them, because just listening to people talk is not enough anymore.
Can I debate you a little on that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I have this history podcast where we started 4 years ago, and we have, I don't know, hundreds of episodes. We're just going chronologically.
It's very good.
Forever.
Until the world ends.
We're in 1920. We're in 1920 something now. It's taken us a while to get there. But sometimes I'll do a 3-hour one, and I just track the downloads. It's usually a little better than a 2-hour one.
Downloads is one thing, though. Listening to the whole thing, you don't know how much they listen.
But neither do you.
You do. When you look at the actual numbers and thing, you see it go down.
Wait, we could just test it. Are you listening now?
But your point is right. They're not scared of long stuff. It's just there is always going to be an audience. My point is, though, at a mass scale, like it's one thing to capture, 3,000 tankies. Fine. But where's everyone else? We can't do this without everyone else. We have to get them. And our media, this is the debate that we have in media. It's not enough. But if we have everyone else with us doing that media too, it's not just go to this show. Start your own. It's not hard. It's okay, they might nuke your channel. Fine. You lose some work. Fine. But then start another one. Change its name, change your name, change the email. There's no rules to any of this. You can just do stuff. But yes, the attention span is real and it is dying. And the shorts and reels and all those, these are psyops that are trying to both get you to stay longer on your phones, but retain you in a more superficial kind of engagement where you're just scrolling, and that's it. So this is a worry for me of just my own business, which is how am I going to keep my customers? How am I going to keep this business model of sitting down for 2 hours and talking to another human being and recording it and posting it? It's actual worry of mine. But,
just do it, Sina.
Well, you do it anyways, but wozu? What for?
Thanks. I would just say that one of the things that the movement around Palestine has done is it has brought a lot of people in the struggle. It's radicalized a lot of people. And we have to say, because always in analyzing forms of class struggle, you have to look at the victories and you have to look at the losses and the advances and the shortcomings. I think global consciousness has been changed. Think about what Zionism looked like 3 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. There has been a significant shift, and that's due to massive mobilization. But I think where the movement, or at least my experience of the movement, has come up short is we need to move from mobilizing people, radicalizing them, bringing them out to events and protests, to setting up organizational structures that provide the continuity, the leadership, and also the political education that connects Palestine to the overall anti-imperialist struggle. And it is obviously in the crosshairs of global imperialism. So it's a perfect prism for understanding Israel and Latin America, for understanding so much of what's going on around the world. And we need the organizational forms to do that. The last thing that I'd say is, there's a Twitterification of the mind. They are very explicitly developing technological tools in order to limit the capacity of human beings to have continuous thoughts. They want to take your time away. They want to make you doom scroll, and they want to make you stupid as fuck. And part of that also means taking you from where you are and driving you to the right. So all of the algorithms are moving you in a direction where you are not only becoming stultified, but you're also gravitating toward what is the biggest hit, because on the means of communication, because who owns all of this? Or almost all of it. Hopefully everybody's on WeChat. But the owners of these tech platforms have a vested interest not only in stultifying, but in driving people to the right. So I think we're at a good point to wrap up the book launch. And I'll just say one final thing. Touch grass, read a book.
All right, awesome. I just want to thank again our panelists. I want to thank Gabe for joining us today. And I want to thank you guys for all coming out. We're going to have some mingling time now. We have the space till about 10 p.m. We really want to clear out of here by then. Feel free to get some books, chat with Gabe, get your books signed. I just have, and we have some refreshments left, I think. And then just want to make a few quick announcements. On next events. So the Popular Front of Canada will be hosting a teach-in on imperialism sometime late Feb, early March with Brampton for Palestine and some of the other 4 Palestine writing groups. Also, given the new agreements with the Carney government in China, there's been an increase in interest regarding China, I'm sure. And I was told the Popular Front will be planning a teach-in on modern China sometime in the near future. Popular Front is actively recruiting.